Welcome to Let's Talk Wellness. This is a talk series where we bring people to uncover practices, places, and people who make wellness meaningful. We usually do this in a much more official setting, official in the sense we record it and we sometimes do it live. And Ranmalee and I just decided to just have a chat about decoloniality and just see how things would unfold. How we want to do this is by giving Ranmalee the space to just go with the flow, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A session where we can all talk. Ranmalee and I go way back. I think a lot of the work I do it because I'm also inspired by what Ranmalee does. She has been a mentor of sorts and a friend, a colleague, and an advocate for South Asian wellness. The method of decolonization and decoloniality. That's all the information or the introduction I'm going to give of Ranmalee. Everything else she will talk about. Ranmalee, welcome to Let's Talk Wellness.
Jaima, Hari Om. Jaima, Hari Om. Before we get into the talking part, I just want, it's morning here and it's nighttime somewhere, and for other people it's somewhere in between these bookends of the day. So what I want you to do is, let's just maybe rub our hands together, put them on our eyes, and because we'll be listening and thinking and seeing, just maybe close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths, right? Om Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwara Guru Evam Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Ranmalee Perera. I am from Sri Lanka. I am currently occupying the land of the past, present, and future Tongva people, whose this land, the colonial name of which is it's called Long Beach, California. So I'm also here because of the immense work and the labor and riding on the shoulders of my ancestors, but also riding on the shoulders as an Asian on those people who fought for Asian citizenship and immigration rights in the 60s, okay? As a counter to the horribly racist colonial Asian Immigration Act of what is now called the United States of America, okay? I also want to acknowledge the genocide and the continued displacement and the absolute violence that has been enforced upon the people of Palestine, people of Gaza, and what is continuing there is not a famine, it's a forced starvation of a population. I also want to acknowledge that as a Sri Lankan, I am always in this space of liminality, right? And I want to acknowledge the state-sponsored violence of incurred and forced upon by the state on the people of Sri Lanka and on other colonial post, I guess, former colonized nations. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of go to this setting up this conversation for everyone, right? How I will be doing this is the conversation itself is structured and the discussion itself is structured to embody living the ideology of decoloniality. So with that, I'm just going to kind of go into a spiel. Let's see, I'm going to get, and I will be looking at notes just to let you know. I can't remember all of these things in my head. So when I acknowledge the violence of nation states committed against their own people, and when I do a land acknowledgement, or when we do a land acknowledgement, and when we talk about reparations, the very least we can do when we do this is to support an indigenous person, okay? Buy a book by them, support a practitioner, right? It's not a transactional thing, it's not extractive, but for the simple fact that we are being able to recite a land acknowledgement, okay? So in the context of South Asia, whether it be Sri Lanka, whether it be India, whether it be Southeast Asia in Bali, all these destination retreat places, okay, spend time resourcing and studying the many systemic inequalities and within the system that has been constructed, and also know how these fragile cracks are used by colonists, and then in quote unquote post-independent states, how successive local and international powers use these fractures of contested identity in a modern nation, okay, a modern nation state like Sri Lanka. So what I'm trying to say is it is on us as practitioners, as curators of discussions, as curators of retreats, all these different things, to educate ourselves of what's going on, right, in these spaces.
Decoloniality in the form of like retreats, yoga trainings, yoga in general. I know you wanted to talk about this anyway, but maybe it's a good place for us to start. If you can, for the audience, maybe talk about plainly what does decoloniality means for someone who is a practitioner.
Right. So I'm going to get into that. But just before, and like I said, everyone here, I think I got my talking notes up. So I'm just going to kind of, let's see, go into this space. I'm going to, for everyone here, just be aware of the structure of this discussion as well as the content, right? Because this discussion between Jude and I have structured in a way to actually reflect decoloniality. I will go into a description of those later, but for now, I also want to, and that's why when I discussed the land acknowledgement, I did tell you that one of the solutions for having the privilege of doing a land acknowledgement is to support indigenous practitioners and writers and academics and thought provokers, right? Another aspect of living decoloniality is when you curate spaces such as this, right? These are all learning spaces. Even if you're hosting a puja to a ritual of some sort, into a classroom, into a yoga space, into a retreat, it's a learning space, okay? It's where knowledge is kind of exchanged, okay? So, in this sense, we need to have something, we have to have a community agreement. And before I come to a description of decoloniality, I want you to know that I'm here to learn from you as you are to learn from me, right? It's a circle of knowledge. However, in this circle, we will always, as living decoloniality, right? So I'm giving you expressions or manifestations of how decoloniality can show up in your spaces, right? I will always, and I have always centered Black, Brown, and Indigenous voices. Okay, what does that mean, right? It means that at the end of this discussion, when Jude and I have a Q&A, or y'all can talk about your challenges, your discomforts that came up, questions, clarification on my ramblings, okay, etc. That time at the end will be set aside for Black, Brown, and Indigenous voices first, okay? Right? Because we are centering them. We are centering ourselves, right? Then this is extremely important. And if I don't get to your question or your challenge or your clarification or your comment, or then you can email Jude and and I will most definitely engage with you. Okay. So during this whole process, as with your learning spaces and your retreats, gatherings, experiences, the central focus should be Black, Brown, and Indigenous voices, right? Also know that Black, Brown, and Indigenous voices are not a monolith, okay? Because there is a very pervasive class and caste structure embedded in this term, Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples and nations. So let's see, be respectful, right? I will not be providing a toolkit nor a list, okay? I will not be providing definitions because definitions themselves are limiting. It limits the imagination, okay? But I will be giving explanations. Now, as a Sri Lankan, Tamil, and Sinhalese, I want to say Ayubovan to everyone. Vanakkam, Namaskar to my Bengali speakers. Bienvenidos, and welcome, right? Thank you for taking this time. My path, you can look up my bio in Jude's, Mindful Academy, blah, 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 right? Like all my stuff, right? You can look it up, okay? But what I want you to know is that my research and my work, merging my 30 years of academic experience with my equal amount of time with quote unquote, and I'm putting it now in quotes, wellness, has been inspired by all my teachers, all my gurus, my guru parampara, right? My teachers at the present, in the past, and in the future. It is really pushed forward, and I have had to refine my thoughts. And I've embraced three theoretical perspectives that flow extremely well with decoloniality and living decoloniality. And notice I'm not using decolonization, okay? Right? I want you to kind of register that I'm not, right? And moving forward, I won't be using wellness either. I will be using well-being, okay? The theoretical perspectives that have informed me come from Black liberation theory, indigenous critical perspectives, and South Asian feminism, okay? Not Western feminism, right? The idea of senti pensante. Sentir is to feel, pensante is to think, the sensing and feeling person. This idea of senti pensante has come to me in the work of someone who has expanded it, is Doctora Laura Rendon. Okay, the idea of senti pensante, and this is so beautiful, and this is what called me. It comes from what's his name? Okay, this Colombian sociologist. His name is Orlando Borda, and he developed this term sentipensante when he was in Colombia, in the coast of Colombia, and he was watching the fishermen. Okay, think about those of you who are from Sri Lanka and other parts of the world that there is a coast. Think about the fishermen. Okay, they are the wisdom keepers. Okay, think about the fishermen on the coast. So he looked at these, he lived among the fishermen, and he saw that their worldviews were worldviews of this idea of sentir and pensante, the sensing and thinking person, where they simultaneously merged the intellect, right? Like two forms of intelligence. They're sensory and intellectual. If any of you live on the coast of Sri Lanka as a child, and this was why I was drawn to it, this is living decoloniality, right? As a child, I remember growing up in Venapur, which is a coastal town, western part of the island, right? Southwest, going a little bit down south. In Nigambo. I used to listen, and also on the southern coast of the island, I used to hear the fishermen throwing out their nets and singing, right, the Mahadal Kavi, which is the giant net that they throw out Mahadala, and they sing these songs. Right? It's beautifully poetic. Now, those are people who embody this idea of senti pensante, right? So when we curate things, they are not just photo ops, okay? They are embodying the very thing that we want to bring in to our retreats. They're there living it, right? Decoloniality then is a process. The other concept of this senti pensante is in the realm of, I guess, decoloniality, is these 3 R's, which is used to bridge the gap between our sensing and our intellect. And that is remembering, resourcing, and reconnecting. Okay? These are 3 aspects of decoloniality. And these are 3 aspects of learning that we really need to embody when we create and curate these spaces. Okay? They're learning spaces. Right? Every time you are guiding someone to do something, it becomes a learning space. right? Every single time. So whenever I write, whenever I do research, whenever I develop curriculum, whenever I curate gatherings, etc., I use this intersectionality of work in education, spaces of learning, and the ideas of well-being. The other thing I always keep in mind is, even in this engagement that we're having, I take the work of, I'm informed and inspired and awe-inspired by the work of people like Bell Hooks in her teachings, teaching to transgress, right? Where she says that these spaces of learning and transformation, individual transformation that we all are working towards, has to be in a container. But you hear this word safe place for your vulnerability, safe place for this. Of course, it doesn't have to be an unsafe place, but it shouldn't be a completely safe place either, right? It has to be a safe enough place, because learning happens where there is discomfort. Learning happens when there is a challenge. Learning happens when these feelings come up, right? And this is what our gurus are there for, right? Every single one of us has a mentor. None of what I am saying is my own, right? I don't own it. Everything that I am saying is someone else's, right? It comes from our Guru Parampara, right? So this idea of safe enough spaces. The third aspect is from the work of an amazing anthropologist that I respect, Dr. Arjun Appadurai, and he talks about scapes, right? This is a scape. This is a media technology scape. Okay, this media technology scape, right? Learning scapes. These are all scapes, and how we create these spaces, he calls scapes, is very important. So when I draw from his work, in ideas of indigeneity and globalization, right? Because this is globalization right here, okay? It is also the globalization of indigeneity. It is also neoliberalism. This is also necrocapitalism, okay? Right? And so Ananda Appadurai, he says that global cultural forms are indigenized, contested, and reproduced in the local context, right? Local cultural context. We are not a homogeneous bunch, right? We have so many differences going on within systems, most often systems of oppression, right? And so he says that global cultural forms are not merely imposed on local cultures, but are taken up and adapted within specific national and cultural contexts. This is what is happening. So if you take Appadurai's kind of the use of hegemonic devices, and if you take Appadurai's idea of scapes, right? Yeah, we are taking something that was ours, that has then been taken outside of us, right, through various processes of colonization, imperialism, globalization, and then it has been transformed in a way and then repackaged and superimposed on our culture. And then who's allowing this, right? It is the systems of oppression that were created, right? That were created within the local cultural context, right? So we cannot talk about individual health and well-being and the transformational power of spaces and people without addressing systems, right? So these are the very broadly the three kind of aspects, right? So decoloniality then means what does it mean, and what does the language of decoloniality mean, right? Decoloniality is a process as opposed to decolonization. Decolonization are the structures that were fought against, the struggles and the processes that happened for independence, quote unquote, or self-governing to happen in nations that were colonized, right? The decolonization of structures, and most often physical spaces, right? It's very much like it's this dichotomy, right? There is like colonial, post-colonial, post-racial, and then you have this whole bunch of work surrounding decolonization, which we're seeing a lot in the wellness, quote unquote, okay, industry. Decoloniality, however, is then, let's see, decoloniality is a remembrance. Remember the 3 R's, right? Is a remembrance, right? I can't offer like a concrete definition of decoloniality, but like I said, decolonization is the removal of physical structures of power, right? The various political, social, economic, and religious processes, most often the struggle for sovereignty. Decolonization decoloniality is a path, a process. It is very much related to the idea of Sankofa, the Ghanaian concept from the Twi speakers of Ghana, this idea of Sankofa. And it is our ability as a collective to go back and retrieve what was forcibly taken from us, right? What was forcibly devalued, where how money has become the measure of success of our gatherings and our retreats and our offerings, right? Right? Yes, we have to live. I'm not knocking on, sustaining ourselves and our needs, but decoloniality is to go back and take back and retrieve what has been forcibly taken from us. It is to valorize the collective ideals of communities. It allows us to become aware of the violence of modernity, right? So there was an image that I posted, multiple images and ideas and descriptions in colonial literature where, South Asians and Africans were used in human zoos, okay? I want you to think of that concept of a human zoo, and I want you to think deeply about how our spaces, we are carrying on that legacy of a human zoo, okay? Right? When we pose for pictures with locals, even though we say, oh, and it becomes okay because, oh, we are compensating them for the picture, okay? We are compensating them for this, okay? Right? This is neoliberalism, right? These are the inequities within the system. So decoloniality not only allows us to become aware of the violence of modernity, because know that this world is built upon the forced labor of others, but also to reconcile ourselves with ancient ways of living, thinking, being, and existing. Now, in this natural environment. Reconnecting is whatever little is left of our natural environment, right? Our natural circadian rhythms, our natural spirit practice. Know that when I talk about nature and natural, it is not just these beautiful, optics that we create of waterfalls and mountains and friendly smiling people and what have you, right? Beaches. We are all complicit in this, right? Myself included, right? No, nature is destructive, right? Nature is destructive, and with that destruction, especially in places like Sri Lanka, where not only the people have experienced war, right, a protracted conflict, Sri Lanka has been traumatized gravely by tsunami and natural disasters. This is embedded in the psyche of the people that we use, right? And yes, I do know that we all pay for using them, right? But that we use for our gatherings, our rituals, our retreats, whatever, right? What about them? What about their psyches? What about their wisdom? But also, what about their trauma? Okay, right? So, this is decoloniality. So, it's not about the sunsets and the traditions that we bring aboard. So, I love this. I'm going to read this because I really love this description of decoloniality, and I'm going to stop and give you all like kind of a thought question that is related to Maslow's, hierarchy of needs or whatever it is, self-actualization, right? Because it relates to decoloniality and it exemplifies colonization actually. So you have decoloniality reveals the dark side of modernity and how it is built on the backs of others that modernity racializes, erases, and or objectifies. Therefore, decoloniality is not a singular thing. It is a method and paradigm of restoration and reparation, okay, that depends on context, historical conditions, and geography. Therefore, as a method, it aspires to restore, elevate, renew, rediscover, and acknowledge and validate the multiplicity of lives and live experiences. It's not in the past tense. It's not lived experience, but it's lived experience. Okay? Culture and knowledge of indigenous people, people of color and colonized people, as well as to decenter the cis normative gender hierarchies and racial privilege. We are all here, we are all privileged, and we are all entitled. Okay? We are here by the very fact that we are here, right? And we are privileged in different ways and entitled in different ways. Okay? So, what I want to go back to is now as homework, because I'm a teacher, professor for a long time, so I have to give homework. Think about, I'm sure most of you have heard about this self-actualization, Maslow's, and most recently called Maslow before Bloom or something like this, right? This self-actualization and the hierarchy of needs, right? Look at that narrative. And this is how we have erased indigeneity, right? And local knowledge. We've taken this, and this is that globalization aspect that Arjun Appadare talks about. We've taken Maslow's theory, and this is like, it's well known, it's used in different iterations in many areas of our lives, right? And workspaces, whatever. But it comes from the Blackfoot people, right? And research it, see what it means, right? See how this idea of self-actualization and community actualization has been kind of twisted on its head to serve a very colonial purpose, okay? And a very capitalistic purpose, okay? We are all seen as needing to be fixed, right? And this is the difference between wellness and well-being. We are all seen as needing to be fixed by many different ways. I'm not saying that we don't have traumas that need to be tended to and nourished, but this idea of fixing, right? And this idea of happiness, sukh, is always at the center. We are selling this, right? In many ways. So Maslow's hierarchy, what I'm trying to say is that the self-actualization by Maslow is, from its very inception, violently appropriative. It consciously makes invisible the indigenous roots and the collective consciousness of the Blackfoot Nation and people. Their ideas of collective liberation, cultural perpetuity, which is what we are trying to bring back in these spaces where we practice decoloniality, the cultural perpetuity of our collective, right? And that has to be central when we create these spaces. Cultural perpetuity, and community actualization, and at the very last, it's self-actualization. And like I said, it has been turned upside down. I want this to sink in and really think about it, really evaluate it, of how we all, myself included, engage in this. We generously and simultaneously borrow from Black, brown, and indigenous people, right? We borrow. We help ourselves do it. Right? So, yeah, just jot down questions, think about how these things, these various variables, good and bad, whatever, don't try to dichotomize it. Just jot down if you can, not if you're driving. How do these things show up in a very beautifully, sensuously, aromatically curated spaces, right? How do these aspects show up? In Sri Lanka, it's really important to bring in our tortured psyches, okay, to the table. We are, in Sri Lanka specifically, we are a nation of people who have been through a 30-year protracted conflict, and people are still going through that process. So when we curate spaces in Sri Lanka currently, we cannot ignore the fact that in the north of the island, that there are mass graves being dug up, okay? It's not possible. Okay. This is decoloniality. This is an acknowledgement to the people and spaces. So think about this. Let it digest. Jude, I need to have a sip of my tea so you can talk a little bit.
As always, yeah, you take it very deep. Lots to think about. I like. I think before this we tried to come up with definitions. Or at least I tried to come up with a definition and a structure around decoloniality, and you were very adamant on not doing that. And it is also beautifully explained in this little definition, if I can call it that, that it is a method, and it is a practice. So if it's a method, I'm trying to bring it into like the South Asian, Sri Lankan context, at least South Asian wellness that is practiced in Sri Lanka. Maybe it's also a question for everyone to think about. How does language and ritual play a part in this? I think I mentioned to Ranmalee that I was at a large tourism conference yesterday, and hundreds of tour operators, all the people who are responsible for driving the wellness industry, quote unquote wellness industry. Now there are a lot of livelihoods at stake when I say these things, because tourism play a big part in driving or emerging certain people, places out of poverty even. So keeping this in mind, how can we bring in the language and the ritual aspect of South Asian wellness into yoga trainings, into retreats, into wellness experiences?
This is a great question. I mean, it can be, how do we kind of do a paradigm shift, right? And also keeping in mind that the poverty that people experience are caused by the continuation of colonial mindset, right? And seeing humans of production units. This is why the systemic oppression and systemic processes have to be central when we are constructing these spaces, right? So I think I was talking to Revata this morning, because he said, Ranmalee, but these people need money, they're going to do things for money. Of course, people are going to do things for money. We are doing things for money. Okay. I mean, let's be totally honest. So the next question is, why? What is our intention? What is our why when we create these things? And if we look really deep down, beneath all the fluff of all the wording, of all the counterculture wording, of all the appropriated wording about all of this, they're words, but what is the bottom line? And I believe at the very end, it is our basic ego need to sustain ourselves, which is great. Okay. But there has to be a balance here, right? There has to be some kind of merging, some kind of intentional thinking behind it. And I know each one of you, by the very fact that y'all are here, is that it shows your dedication to actually trying to do something about these situations that have arisen, right? The photograph of Adivasi sitting and this Polish couple getting married, and they're now curating these, I don't know, weddings. Okay, I don't know. It's called Whispering Silona, something like this, right? And yes, people are going to be paid for the business ideas of Europeans, of locals, of everyone, okay? Because money is this everybody calls money energetic, okay? Money is something that we use to purchase spaces and places in our lives, okay? So with that being said, how do we reconstruct something like this? How do we change this paradigm? And as an educator and as a linguist, I think it begins with whether it is plant medicine, whether it's Ayurveda, whether it is yoga, whether it is travel pilgrimage, whether it is any of these things, all of which I have curated myself. Okay. So when I say we, I'm learning from you as well as you learning from me, right? This is a circle. I think it comes down to how we deconstruct these words. It comes down to how we bring in this awareness of decoloniality into these spaces, right? So, wellness. Wellness. Before we go to wellness, I want to address one more thing about this idea of indigenous people or native people. In Sri Lanka, as in elsewhere, we have this colonial idea of indigenous people living in a harmonious marriage with nature, where there is, resourcing from the land and all of this, all true. But what we also have forgotten is this idea of indigeneity in the urban context. This is very true in Sri Lanka, right? And my friend, he wrote a book, I think a few years ago. It was called There. His name is Tommy Orange. And also one of my mentors, Kim Tallbear, she talks about this. And this is the idea of the urban Indian, right? And indigenous people are also urban, right? They're not a monolith, right? So is it necessary for them to be portrayed in, I don't know, in feathers and grass skirts and amudes and, holding certain weapons? Is it necessary, or can we see an urban Indian wearing, I don't know, Nikes and a baseball hat and, smoking a spliff, walking down the street on the streets of Oakland, on the streets of Long Beach? Okay, these are indigenous people too, right? This is the idea, that this is the contested idea of the exportation of and the globalization of the identity of indigeneity. And I would really, read Tommy Orange. Read Kim Tallbear. Those books are really beautiful. So the idea of well-being. Okay, so I will shift from wellness to well-being. The idea of well-being is very related to creating ethical spaces for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. Okay. Indigeneity is not an identity. Indigeneity is not defined by their remoteness to quote unquote civilization. Okay. This is decoloniality, right? To understand that. Okay. Our practices in Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, shamanic rituals, all of those don't have to be defined by its remoteness to quote unquote civilization, right? We live in a concrete jungle, okay? We live in these spaces, right? These spaces nourish us, okay? Roses do grow from concrete, right? So my idea of well-being is about trust and time and holding on to the faith that we are all well, perhaps in various states of it. Wellness has an opposite. The opposite of wellness is illness and disease. So we are trying to fix, right? And unfortunately, these definitions of wellness are seeping into Ayurveda, Helavedakama, Deshiya Chikitsa, Paramparika Vedakama, Siddhi, all these different ancestral medicine, rituals, and technologies. But well-being is a process. We are all well, but in different stages of it. Okay? It's like these people that do and no shade on people who are doing it, and but it's a prime example. People who do this thing called Kundalini awakening process that I'm seeing everywhere. Okay, right? I'm sorry, but our Kundalini is already there and awakened. Okay, right? Wellness is like this. We are all well. We have been forced to be sick, right? And therefore, a whole industry has been created around our sickness, getting over our disease and illness, and then chasing after this idea of wellness. So, in an industry, it is essential to try, and I don't have the answer of how to do it, okay? Of shifting the paradigm on shifting the wording, okay? If all of us in this group, I don't know, 18 of us or whatever, if we can shift from using wellness to well-being, it's a start, right? So now also well-being, then let me just go back to like a very limiting kind of explanation of wellness. Wellness is essentially aggregated empirical data treating the individual in the full spectrum, right? Like physical, mental, emotional. Wellness is about bringing in all these things to somehow fix. And the important part is that it is data driven, okay? Now, in spaces of well being, it is also important when we bring in practitioners. Okay, when we bring in indigenous practitioners, when we bring in black, brown practitioners, when we bring in someone to do a sound bath, when we bring in someone to do Reiki, when we bring in someone to administer ayahuasca, we have to ask the question about their well being, right? We have to ask the question whether are they staff and service providers. We have to ask the question, do they have equitable access to healthcare? And when I say healthcare, I'm talking about, do they have the structural access to hospitals, to doctors, allopathic doctors who do diagnostics, okay, who you need to go to when you have like emergency surgery, okay? Because black, brown, and indigenous people have historically, and remember this when we bring in practitioners, right, have historically been left out and do not have access to modern healthcare, okay? Right? It has always been a struggle. And not only that, their wellness and well-being practices and their practices and ancient technologies and wisdom have been relegated to folklore, okay? Or alternative, right? So the struggle, at least here, is to kind of merge those, right? And ask the question, do they have access to healthcare? Also, black, brown, and indigenous people, and mainly the enslaved, okay, have been used as medical experimentation. So our bodies have contributed to wellness in this way, right? So changing this idea of wellness and well-being, from wellness to well-being, the shift has to happen. We need both, right? We need both. And the people that you're paying money to, right, to come and staff, when they're at the table, when they are staffing an Ayurvedic clinic, where are they getting their wellness from? Okay, where are they getting their health from? How are they tending to their internal and external altar and well-being? Right? Are we just throwing money at them? They're having a seat at the table. Optically, it's great, right? But what is really happening? are they able to participate in the rituals, in the teas, in the conversation, in the food, in every aspect of the curation that the paying participants are getting, right? Wellness is very individuated. Well-being comes from a concept of deep connectedness to collective liberation. So let's see. I am going to stop here. Another question is...
I love that. Yeah, that's a good place to stop, Ranmalee.
Let me ask a question, and this is food for thought, and then we can go and have questions. Are we in our wellness gatherings, okay, and I put wellness in quotes, gatherings replicating the same systems that marginalize people in the first place, right? I want to, in the context of the wellness research industry and tourism in this case, have we asked ourselves the basic question about the equity and the accessibility of health and well-being among the people we bring out as wisdom keepers and local practitioners to our gatherings and curations, right? Remember that indigenous populations, Black, brown, and indigenous populations, their lives were interrupted by colonialism, right? And I think this is a term used by Kimberly Crenshaw, I think, and their lives were interrupted. These interruptions ranging from interruptions in traditional foodways and medicine, to barring indigenous people from entering health professions, to systemic barriers for access high quality healthcare for rural populations, just to name a few. All have contributed to the disproportionate poor health and economic poverty outcomes for indigenous people, and a distrust of the larger healthcare system. Now, I want to end with this, the words distrust of a larger healthcare system. We are using that distrust that these people, a distrust that has been forced upon people in many ways. We're capitalizing on that distrust, right? And it's something very hard to accept. And so I will end with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to think about. Thank you, Anand. Bye.
Jaima, Hari Om. My pranams to Guruji and Ushama and Swami Ambikananda. Jaima. Have fun on the roof.
So yeah, I think we have about 10 minutes for some questions. I think it's a lovely way to end it also, to question what wellness is and what well-being is, especially in this space that we all live in, where we are practicing things under a model of global economy, where everything is seen through this lens of maximizing the individual health and maximizing consumption versus, I think, well-being, and what the indigenous wisdom, what the ancestral wisdom, South Asian wellness, or South Asian practices rather, also can teach us is how we can utilize resources effectively. And that is well-being. This is at least how I see how we can progress in Sri Lanka if we do bring in these people, places, and practices more into these spaces and listen to them. We might find answers together. So thank you, Ranmalee, for that chat. Ranmalee and I have been continuously doing this work back and forth, and it's always a pleasure. If you want to connect with Ranmalee, her social handles and details are on our Instagram. She has a retreat coming up on self-nourishment for collective liberation, and she also does women's womb care rituals, rituals of Shakti Tantra, and much more. And if you are interested in decoloniality in the wellness industry, she will also craft something with Mindful Academy in the future. Just talk to us and we'll put you on the wait list. Yeah, it's been a pleasure just having you all. And Ranmalee, thank you for coming on.
Of course. I'm so happy. Like, wow, look at all these people. Hi, Serena. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. Revata.
Yeah, one thing I would like if we can do some closed captioning for the people who want to be listening into this in Mexico. I think that I don't know, we'll have to talk about it. But any questions, email me, send me a message on Veda Spices on my Instagram. But also, yeah, just if you have questions, just it doesn't have to be so formal, we can just ask me. I'll answer it to the best of my ability. And if I can't answer it, I will refer you to people who are much more knowledgeable than me to answer those questions. Bye, everyone.